were some people who decided to say we can do DPS Lavril. For those of you who did that, congratulations, you earned yourself a place in the Hall of Fame. Outside of that, absolutely useless character. Hey, what is up guys, it's your boy Toy here. This will be a video, a tier list, which will be a very long one because we got a lot of characters to talk about. But this also will be an introduction to a PvP sequel that I will be making. And to get the worst out of the way, a PvP tier list would come first. The list that I will be using is Shinx and Bravos from what I've heard. I think this is about the best one to use right now. However, this is ever changing. And the reason to just point this out is, for instance, this Kasel. He used to be absolutely up here at the very least, but since people are using Gao and know how to counter Kasels, guess what? He's not that much of an issue anymore. And it didn't really take any balance patches or whatsoever, more artifacts, no. It just took people time to adjust to the meta. But ladies and gentlemen, do keep this with a grain of salt. If you might be watching this video 2-3 months later, this list could have been changed due to either balance patches or people adjusting to the meta. So once again, credit to Shinx and Bravo for setting up this list, making my life a whole lot easier. What I will be doing though is I will be going over each and every last one of these characters and give you guys the information that I have on these to simply tell you why these have the position that they have and why they are strong or why they're not. However, I am not saying that if you have a tier hero such as a Lilia, such as a Kybera, such as a Gladi, that they have no place in the game. Entirely not true, ladies and gentlemen, but you have to build your way around it. But let's get it started with the very first one, and that will be Valance. So what basically makes her the absolute strongest is very simple. She is used in practically every team. You cannot go wrong with her on building her because I got the worst DM stats on her. She is still working, ladies and gentlemen. As she enables so many characters that usually fell off the bandwagon. You can even put Nyx and Lilia on her. The fact that they cannot get stunned anymore allows them to do 100% of their damage. Next one upon the list would be Isaiah, and she is crazy because she grants immunity to a team. Yes, her S3 skill basically says for X amount of seconds, depending on what kind of UT you're using, you cannot be damaged anymore. However, you can dispel this, so there are counters to her. But if you find yourself a team that has no dispels, guess what? You are immortal. There is, however, a big downside to this character, and that would be investment. She needs a ridiculous investment to be good. For starters, you will need a 220. The reason why is part of her healing skills from her HP. Which in turn means the more HP that you have, the more healing that you can do, but also means that if you don't have her maximum investment, that means a 220, 10 star, fully reclaimed gear, she will not be doing as much healing as you do. As well as the fact that you need a Christmas star ornament or a 5-star soul spring water on her to be fully utilized. Next upon the list is Dosarta, and after her buff she became humongous, and not necessarily for the thing that she was meant to do, and that is beat up rebel claws. Because for starters, the reason why this happened is because of this. T5 Dark reduces all enemies damage that ignore defense by 25% on base, but whenever you're using a skill, that amplifies by 2 for 3 seconds, which means that you can innately half a Rebel Claw's damage for whenever he does something like that. But not only that, you get a lot of defense stats by just having her on your team. You can get yourself some physical critical resistance for absolutely no reason. You can amplify that up with having the right UT, and if this would not be enough, you got yourself a unique weapon that will grant you attack and defense stat at the beginning of a fight, and that lasts for the first 15 seconds of the fight. After that, the whole effect is halved, which means that on top of Valance, you will have yourself 2 characters within a team, which makes it insanely hard to kill characters. Put yourself double healers, a fall of Ffrey, put a Dakaris up there for some damage, and you got yourself a nearly unkillable frontline. Next upon the list is Fall of Ffrey, and Fall of Ffrey is one of those characters that everybody has got built. Everybody. Because you need her for PvE as well, so why not just make her for PvP? You can, because she is an absolute monstrosity when it comes to it. You can build her damage, you can build her healing, you can amplify up her shield, so she is not only situational, she is really good and synergizes pretty much every team as well. Once again, one of the most interesting things I would feel is the S4 Light, because it once again gives you all defense times 20 and all damage reduction onto 10%. Which in turn means that you have so many base stats once again with just starting out the fight. On top of that, you have a Dispel whenever you time it correctly on the S1, a ridiculous heal that comes with it, a S2 shield that is very hard to break unless you can Dispel it, and if you thought that she didn't just do damage, she will amplify your team's damage as well with the S3, among which you can stun people as well. Now I have a very personal preference on using her, and that would be with a new type thruster, because her cooldowns are quite long, which means that in turn if I get stunned with this I get more shields, more lightnings and more heals along the way. However, another thing that you can simply use is a honorary medal, because more base stats. It's very simple. It's just a humongous addition toward your Fall of Ffrey. Next one upon the list would be Scarlet. And Scarlet is one of these reasons that this game turned upside down. She is one of few that can frontline stun anybody and everybody that is not perma CC immune, such as Chase. And this is due to a combination of the Judgment Lighter Bracelet, which will improve your CC accuracy by 750. And her S4 that has a 10% chance of dealing additional damage and stunning. Oh wait, a combination, make that 20% on your attack speed with the S4, with the UT4. Now I've seen about a gazillion Scarlet builds and I'm not even sure if mine is the right one. The one thing that I do find interesting is having her on a little bit of attack speed, even though you will get 500 from just the UT alone. It will allow you to then proc these more often and improve your damage even further if you are lucky. But the other reason why she's really good is because she can be put in a wide variety of teams. If you use your S2, you will not only dispel the enemy team, you will cleanse your own. But if you find yourself an unbreakable shield such as Heaven or Lucikiel, you simply pop your S3 and that thing will be a goner. There's only one other character that has this, and that would be Zara, but she isn't fast enough to do these things anyway. Scarlet, if you build her quite fast, then you can pop that shit whatever you want. So due to her usability, her utility, and her synergy with practically every team, she is up in the triple S tier. Next one upon the list, double S tier rank, would be Rebel Claws. And the reason why this dude is the upper echelon of the double S is because have you found yourself getting killed by Rebel Claws and you don't know why it's about to happen? That is because of the S4. It basically says additional, his normal attack deals X amount of damage to all enemies, and guess what? Upon a 6-second curse, which means that after the curse depletes, you will then get a reapplication of this, which also means that if you will cleanse this buff, which is possible, you will then get another hit as well. So you've seen a multitude of characters just built with simply damage. Because now I'm using an Ocelon set, but why not just build a Galgoria set, get extra damage, put yourself a crystal music box, and just climb yourself up the ladders with a singular hit. It's very cheap, it really works very well. He synergizes with just about everybody. The only thing that you need to do is allow the dude to start up his S3 skill and clean up everybody. Absolutely ridiculous character, and since he's used for PvE as well, definite good investment if you don't know which one you want to start out with. Next one upon the list is quite different but similar, and that will be DL Whack, aka the Dark Lord, aka Kasel, aka the main character but dark. And the reason why he's really good, or at least part of it, is because of his S1, because it blocks mana. Get yourself the right skill and you can then improve the mana block by even further. If the enemy team doesn't have any cleanse of very heavy mana characters, guess what? 9 out of 10 people will die straight away. Now DOK is another one of these characters that can be built absolutely burst-like, which means that if there are any characters, they will just vaporize with a single press of a button. But not only that, there are another few quirks that I really do like, and that is the fact that this dude can never miss. which means that you don't have to build a curse on the dude to kill off Waxels or any other character that has high dodge as well. And the reason why he is then high up there is his synergy with practically every other team. You can build him into a mana depleting team, you can build him into a bruiser team that still works, you can put him into a burst team and he still works and enables all the other characters to do whatever they do. So his utility is absolutely out of this world. Next one on the list is Lucikiel, and for those of you who've never been slapped by him, I welcome you. Go do League of Honor, go get slapped by this dude because it happens ever so often. Now the reason why this dude is so good is because he has an unbreakable shield, gets to start off 9 out of 10 times because people don't necessarily have counters for him. He pulls in characters, S3 pulls in mid lines, his soul weapon absolutely obliterates any character that is currently on the field. The only downside of this character is once again the one artifact that everybody needs on him, and that is a Christmas star ornament. He does ignore defense, so technically Dosarta should negate part of his damage. But overall, this is just a absolutely sickening character that can beat up just about every character that you have. And due to the differences in builds, I would put him absolutely into the double S tier because you never know what you might be facing. Are you facing a Lucikiel on where you can dispel his shield? You cannot tell. Are you facing a Lucikiel that you can instantly blow up? You cannot tell. So due to that fact, he is always ban worthy. Next one upon the list is a scholar, a boy if you will. And if you've ever seen your character simply vaporize and you don't know what just happened, that would be due to the rune of frailty. Why? Because it ignores defense and built with a lot of damage, and a crystal music box will instantly vaporize anything that's on the front line. Now you also need to be aware that if you're playing a Leo like this, that you will not be running into any helmets, because helmets will diminish his damage, and even though his S1 skill is on a relatively low cooldown, it will then still allow you to get hurt. He is a counter toward a lot of options that you will be fighting within the game. People that will be running bursts with no cleanses. This character has the answer to most of that. Just simply pop your S3, silence them for 3 seconds, and just say, well, you're not doing anything for now, my friend. You're not doing anything. Which in turn will allow you to start up your fight, open up the S1, obliterate the enemy's front line, and let the rest of your characters clean the rest. Once again, another character that does require some investment to do whatever he does, and it does require some timing and game knowledge to make this character shine as much as he does. Next one upon the list is one of my mans, 100 grand, and that will be Gao, aka Gua Gua, and this dude single-handedly got me the challenger last season, because if I didn't build a dude the way I did, I would have not gotten in there. The reason why is because of his S3. His S3 not only pulls in a lot of characters, but it dispositions a lot of other enemies, and it makes sure that enemies are facing the wrong way. A Shakmeh can never hit your backline anymore with an S1 or an S2. A Kasel will never jump your backline anymore. A Seria, if you do this fast enough, will have a very troublesome time jumping to your absolute backline, which in turn will make these characters absolutely obsolete. Build him even fast enough and you can pull in even Valances before they do their S2. It's just an absolutely humongous character. And guess what? I actually used to not have him on an absolute proper build. He still worked. Did I need him on A220? Not necessarily. Do I need him on a 5-star unique weapon? Not necessarily. It gives him more HP, but it's not necessary. So for that reason, low investment character, high utility. Absolutely monstrosity when it comes to this game. Next one upon the list will be Luna. And Luna is this one character that is the absolute counter anti-burst to anything that you think will happen. Why? Because of her S3. Her skill says critical chance by 100% for 7 seconds. But why? It's 15-second cooldown, so you just have burst windows. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is entirely true. But once you got the UT3, you can then get yourself another 5 seconds on there, making it almost 100% uptime. You can even decide to say, oh, I can do cooldown in 3 so nobody will crit ever again. okay, I wouldn't necessarily go for that because you lose out on a lot of base stats, but you have the potential to do so. So if you're fighting anybody that is burst, you can literally half their damage or even further, because a lot of people build critical damage too. Next one upon the list would be Yuria, and I have a love-hate relationship with her, because if I would build her, I would definitely end up using her. She's one of those characters that, if built correctly, can still one-shot characters even if your combo doesn't work. Simply pop your S2, S3 and you will see people die regardless if they dispel or not. The one way on which I believe she will fall off the bandwagon if Loman gets an undispellable T5 Dark. The moment that happens, this character will absolutely fall off the bandwagon. But nonetheless, I feel that this character has her place within this game. Have yourself a Dosarta Valance, which will allow you to stay relatively safe from any imminent danger that is frontline induced. And guess what? You will probably never die to anything else. On top of that, she doesn't have the highest of pick rates, which I haven't really talked about in any of the other parts yet. The reason why is because all these characters so far do have a very decent, very high pick rate. So another thing that you should be looking at is, do you have enough characters that don't have the highest enough pick rates? Because I can imagine that if you are a newer player, that you don't want to see your resources just being banned or picked. Next one upon the list is a hentai, and Lorraine is one of these characters that is problematic. It makes sure that most of the people cannot start out their game. Reason why, her S1 gives a very simple stun for X amount of seconds. Give it onto another perk, then you can even reduce mana on top of it. The S3 on top of it has a dispel, hits multiple times, says 6 times hit. So if you even build her on a little bit of debuff accuracy, that thing will still stun your Rebel Clauses, your Shakmehs, or your Demias. On top of that, she has healing rate reduction and a attack reduction upon the enemy, depending on how many stacks you have. And on top of anything else, you have yourself tick poison. So if you think this lady needs any crit, no you don't. You can simply get yourself penetration, which can blow up any Loman, if you will, and simply just steamroll just about any character that is within the game. Next one upon the list is Dakaris, and Dakaris is a hilarious character because, for one, after he gets killed, he gets back into his shield, gets a second life, and you can still heal yourself up if you can then still keep yourself safe. Now combine this with a Dosarta that nearly doesn't get killed. He both does damage and heals up your absolute frontline, which in turn means that an already unkillable Dosarta will become even more unkillable if you combine a Dakaris and a Valance with this team. His soul weapon does a ridiculous amount of damage in combination with dispelling the enemy team. And to put an icing on the cake, if there's still some characters left, pop your S3 and you will absolutely decimate any person that is currently on the field. On top of it, he doesn't even have a high pick rate, which means that if you build him, chances of you being actually able to pick him is quite high. Then after the cards, we gotta sell Seria, and Seria is one of these characters that recently got picked more. Funny enough, she's always been around. She received herself a buff, but still has been quite relevant throughout time. And the reason why is, in my opinion, one of the best things is her targeting. She always targets the nastiest of characters. It doesn't even matter where she basically even ignores like your front tank and still goes for your secondary status with just a simple S1. And the reason why the S1 is that good, you got a single mana skill and you got another one that can ignore defense with the right build. And funny enough, I've seen my frontliners blow up to a single S1. Yes, that is my Rebel Claws. Yes, that is my Scarlet. Yes, that is my Lucikiel. I've seen all of them blow up to a single S1. Even all of them, because the AoE width is still wide enough to hit all these characters in one go. It makes no sense to me. But on top of it, we talked about Luna having critical reduction. But it doesn't matter because Seria's all attacks will be a critical hit, but her all block will be disabled and she will take 50% more damage from heroes. That is a nasty trade-off, but either way, you will be able to jump backline characters, scoop up that Luna and just say, lady, sit down, eat a carrot, and just wait until the next day, cry in a damn corner. Next one upon the list would be Cain, and Cain is one of these characters that fell off the bandwagon here and there, and I didn't find as much utility for the dude until I started using a Soul Spring Water on my guy. The reason why this is absolutely humongous because it counteracts anything that wants to stun you from the get-go, and the synergy that I have with this is a Gao that never gets stunned, which means that he will always be opening up the S3, which in turn turns heads, clogs a lot of people, does a lot of damage in the process, and will keep my character safe from a Lucikiel as well, because I can switch out the S1 light and dark, making it single target or triple target, which in turn allows me to stay away from dangers such as a Lucikiel, or with the UT1 get one shot by your Shamillas or any of these other nasty characters that can one shot you. However, this guy is an NPC, which means a lot of investment, and would I necessarily recommend this even on the lower investments? He could work, but you make sure that you build him support instead of damage. And then we got the next one upon the list, and that will be Shamilla. And Shamilla is one of these characters that can one-shot your characters. I think most of you are aware about her absolute ridiculous power. But what I find interesting as well is that she has capacities to dispel with her S2 as well. Which means that if you are running into people who dare to run a bow against you, simply S2 the shield and have another backline DPS solve all your problems. Her shield can be built big enough to survive Rebel Claws' S4, which in turn allow you to still do your damages. But the reason why she fell off the bandwagon is the fact that some Rebel Claws are built to bust down that shield. Next one upon the list is Bernheim, and Bernheim isn't necessarily a good character by himself, but with the right team he is crazy. Put him up with a Dosarta and a Dakaris, a Valance, a Shea, and a fallen Ffrey. He will stay alive and do a ridiculous amount of damage. Dosarta has the capacity to pull in. He has a lot of base defense to even frontline tank if your Dosarta gets banned, especially if you have triple healers on there. Which in turn means that a combination of healing rate reduction will allow him to beat up bruisers, and the ridiculous amount of healing that is coming from all the other characters will allow him to stay safe. The dude overall gets so many basic stats which allow him to both survive, be tanky, and still do damage. And on top of that, his S1 is one of the best counters toward a Scarlet. Reason why it is a continuous dispel onto 8 seconds. The reason why it is that good because Scarlet needs her S4 to perform even more damage if that is on rapid succession. As well as the attack speed lowering that comes with this will allow you to beat a lot of bruiser teams as well. So once again, Bernheim is not necessarily a character good on himself, but with the right team around him, he can shine as one of the best characters. Then next upon the list would be Loman, and Loman is another character that is double S tier, but I found him falling off the bandwagon ever so often because his T5 Dark usually gives you a lot of magical defense, but since everybody is either building penetration or has ignore defense, this becomes quite lackluster, as well as the fact that this is dispellable. So once you find yourself fighting a Yuria with a Loman, you will still die. Fighting yourself a Lorraine with this, you will still die. But on top of everything else, he needs a Soul Spring Water to really stand out, which in turn allows you to open up your S2 shield, grant your other allies some mana to start out your fight. So he isn't necessarily a bad character, don't take me wrong on this, but I think his usability fell off the wagon quite hard due to the current day's meta. Evan is the next one, and this dude has been going back and forth on top of the list. The reason why is he has a irremovable shield as well, and can only be broken by Scarlets. Would that then mean that he is getting countered by her straight away? Yeah, partly, but not necessarily. So what you basically want him to do is have yourself a character that needs a shield because they're either squishy or they can get stunned right off the get-go. This dude will allow him, just as Valance, to let these characters start up. The most ridiculous thing that I see nowadays is actually people drafting out Evan and Valance together, making sure that you have to ban either one of the two, and then have yourself a ridiculous shield that you need to get through just before even reaching your backline characters. But since there are characters who can break his shield, the fact that his healing isn't as good as all of the top mentioned healers, he still fell off the bandwagon in contrast to them. Does that mean he is absolutely bad? No, because you just need to draft around him. Next one upon the list is Naila, and the reason why she's on the double S tier list is because of her S4. It says Naila's normal attacks and skill attacks ignore the target's damage reduction effect. She is the only one into the game that has this, at least to my knowledge. So basically what this means, everything that you have in terms of toughness which reduces the damage gets ignored straight away. Which in turn means that if you have some enemy frontliners, you pop yourself your Valance, your Evan and some other characters that will enable her, you can simply press a single button and absolutely vaporize the enemy team with a boob slam. There is a counter however to this for those of you who build a 25-95 damage, and that is Rebel Claws that simply slaps you that HP off, which means that you will lose out on a lot of damage and allow you to survive at some point. Lakrak on a Currency build can also stun this lady, which means that she needs to use the S2 to get out and still get hit in the process. So there are ways to beat her which basically lowers her in terms of usability within the current meta. However, we see an uprising in people using her, especially the top tier challenger ranks. Next one upon the list is Shakmeh, and the reason why he's good is he is really beefy, he can dispel, he can do damage on top of locking enemies down. On top of that is a damage share T5 dark skill, which will allow you to have your highest attacker share some damage with Shakmeh. But the reason why I feel this character fell off the bandwagon is very simple, because if you make sure that his S1 and S2 cannot hit, aka you jump, you point him to a different direction, he will not be able to lock down the enemy team and do as much damage as he normally would. Which means that in terms of usability, he becomes way more wonky. Last one onto the double S tier list would be Kasel, and guess what? This dude is an absolute monstrosity. Has a ridiculous amount of dodge for whenever people are not even building a currency. He can literally 1v4 teams if he is built correctly and the enemy team doesn't have a counter to it. On top of that, he even has a soul weapon that heals and cleanses himself and the rest of his team, which in turn allows you to run no healers, have a Kasel in there and still be healthy for days to come. However, this dude is not the be-all end-all by any means. Reason why he still needs to get a lot of mana to get into his S3. There are characters who can negate his mana, which in turn allow the dude to never start and never get the defenses that he usually would get, as well as his soul whip. Outside of that, his greatest gimmick is him allowing to jump to people's backline. Well, if you turn heads, such as a Gao, such as a Visca, you will then allow yourself to have a pretty healthy backline, if you will. This way, Kasel doesn't become as much as a threat as he used to be, which is one of the reasons why he gradually fell off the bandwagon onto the tier list. Next one upon the list is Shea, and she is a ridiculous character when it comes to healing. Absolutely humongous mana buffer, and on top of that, her S3 dispels characters and silences them for the start of a fight, so she can be used in several other fights. I feel that she is going to need a Soul Spring Water to start out with the S3, making sure to counteract people like opener S3 Leos, a Lorraine S1 opener, or some other characters that have insta openers, and that will also take away from part of her healing slot, which you can usually use. However, there's another big downside, is she can still get stunned, and I think that to me is the biggest wonky factor on where I never use her. If she gets stunned, you will not get the cooldown reduction onto your other skills, which in turn means that you will be left with no skills that you can pull. You cannot do your rotations, you cannot get into trance, and in turn will allow you to die quite fast. There's a way to mitigate that, and that is use a new type thruster. In turn, it will give you a lot of mana, but it still doesn't seem to be the best. But while using this, you cannot use the S3 once again to mitigate Leos, Lorraines, or whatsoever. Next one upon the list is Tanya, and I have very limited information on her, so I'm not very sure whether I will be providing you the best ones here. So if there's something wrong, please put it down into the comments, let me know. But Tanya is one of these characters that is very nifty toward a burst composition. If you are fighting yourself a Shamilla or any other high burst character that you want to pop down straight away, guess what? Tanya might be your lady. Reason why is because of the first 10 seconds of the fight, she will be in stealth, and the first 5 seconds of that, because of her unique weapon, will render her immune to all damage. That in turn, plus a high burst potential character, will allow you to literally murder everybody. There is a big downside: her immunity can get dispelled. Get yourself a Leo, get yourself a Lucias, she will have a very hard time to burst down the enemy team. As well as Nicky's will pretty much just murder her at all. Juno is the next one upon the list, and she is, for an NPC, very good in terms of healing, but she kind of falls off the bandwagon straight away because her heals can get dispelled. And that is because of Isaiah. Isaiah is a high priority pick in the current League of Honor, which then turns Juno into a very lackluster character. So how you can counter this simply is get your own Isaiah, put up a Juno, and then still run into enemy Cains, enemy Bernheims, and all sorts of other characters that have a continuous dispel that will basically render Juno absolutely useless. Does that mean she is useless? No, not really. She can actually mana drain on top of that, improve your allies' damage, and still have a burst heal on the S3, which in turn is still pretty good. Would I like to see this girl get a buff? Definitely. I got a 10 star, why not? Next one upon the list is Pavel, and the reason why Pavel isn't any higher, if you compare him to Shamilla, he doesn't have a shield, he does a ridiculous amount of instantaneous damage, but will trigger a helm first with his S4, which in turn mitigates down a lot of damage. If you run into a Loman, his damage will be absolutely diminished to maybe even 0. So this dude is highly situational onto your draft. The only upside toward, let's say, a Shamilla is he has a very low pick rate, which means that if you invest into this dude, this investment will be on the field probably every time unless he gets banned. Rodina is one of these characters that I fear most of anything, because a lot of people who do play her know how to build around her in terms of your draft. She's one of those characters that can automatically wipe an enemy lineup if you have yourself a very well-built team around her. So if you decide on building her and wiping the enemy team out, you will then have to get yourself the right supports that work with her. A Valance to allow her to be CC immune for all the time that is necessary for her to pop her skill. A Evan, which does relatively the same. A Dosarta, which can keep her safe for days to come because they cannot reach her. But in no means am I a Rodina player and advising you to play her with those characters whatsoever. I just know that she has a ridiculous amount of damage to be very wary of. Next upon the list will be Ezekiel, and Ezekiel is this nasty character that jumps highest attackers, and this is highly valuable unless the highest attacker is something that you don't want to jump on. But if your target is a Shamilla, the chance of her having the highest attack shield is quite likely, because you want this girl to survive and have her shield up at 100% of the time. So Ezekiel will most likely jump to this. However, if people are very knowledgeable about this stuff and attack bait your Ezekiel, you will then find yourself a very high problem. And then we got one of my babies, and that will be Nicky. Nicky is one of these characters that you can build her super high HP, build her super tanky, allow her to work still within a very high, dense HP team. However, the reason why I think she is still in the S tier is because of her burst and disruption potential if you build her absolute attack. Reason why is if you lower her HP up to 50%, you will grant yourself then a buff that will grant you CC immunity, it will grant you a lot of attack, some critical damage, and the fun part about it is you get yourself 3 mana orbs with the right perk. Once you do that, you can open up BS2 and disrupt the enemy team and then allow your own team to start up, which in turn allow you to run and steamroll the enemy team, especially if they're mass squishy. This can, however, get countered by your Requinas, which in turn renders this character completely useless, which means that she didn't get up much higher than the S tier. Demia is one of these characters that I ended up building, and to this day still feel like I'm regretting this ever so often. She is a great tank, will be able to disrupt the enemy team quite well, but since there are so many characters that have immunity, that have CC immunity that you cannot pull, such as Evan, such as Valance, it will render this character completely useless because she also doesn't have a dispel on top of it. Does that mean that this character is absolutely useless? No, because if you allow her to work, if you synergize with her completely and pull in the characters that you want, then you will most likely win your fight because she makes your team absolutely invincible when fighting yourself physical damage characters. Why? Her S4 gets more physical defense, more P block increase by 250. There's some people that even debate with picking the S4, which will then increase the defense boost and the physical crit resistance up to even more on characters that are not even supposed to have physical crit resistance, which in turn lowers the enemy damage quite significantly. Then the next one upon the list would be Laias, and Laias is also, just as Loman, a ridiculous character when countering magical damage characters. Which in turn means the more attack that you have, the more it will get translated into magical defense. The same goes for her own magical defense, which in turn makes her a very interesting character to simply put a tar card of loss on. Reason why is you don't even need crit on her to have a S1 full heal for absolutely no reason. However, she is so situational that I only see her being used as a 5th pick, and if you already draft around your whole entire team, I rarely see myself picking her whatsoever. The next one is Requina, and Requina is really good for one single reason, and that is mana drain upon characters that aren't supposed to get mana, such as Lucikiel, such as Valance, such as Isaiah. And if she can block that by any means, she is then the absolute god tier of whatever is to come. But standalone, she's not really that much of a good character because her damage will trade off because you're 9 out of 10 either using a Soul Spring Water or a Spirit Morph Ring, which makes her damage fall off quite significantly. Next one up on the A tier list would be Lucias, and Lucias is really good but super situational because his S2 has an additional 2 seconds extra in terms of healing, but not an extra 2 seconds of dispel, which I kind of found out way later. He is very much in a need of a Fragmentation of Kingdom if you use the UT2, and you will need cooldown 2 to then allow him to have your S2 uptime to quite a near 100% uptime. Now the reason why this is not good is because you gotta think of the trade-off. You could here have base stats instead. And the problem is if you face yourself a Rebel Claws, his S4 will then get dispelled, will get reapplied, which in turn deals more damage than you can heal out yourself, which is quite hilarious. Pop your own S2, kill yourself. This is one of the reasons why he fell off the bandwagon to, I would say, the bottom of the S tier. However, I find myself using him against my Tanyas, my Serias, all of these characters that basically jump me, and I don't want them to jump me, so I can lock them down with just a Lucias. Next one upon the list is Miruru, and Miruru used to be one of these top tier contenders that can instantly vaporize your enemy team with just the lowest amount of investments, and I see top tier challengers still pick this. Reason why her damage is nearly unrivaled. On top of that, her S1 stuns, her S2 stuns, and her S3 does a ridiculous amount of damage. On top of everything else, she is going to get a legendary outfit within 2 months, and I'm quite curious how that will make her look. But the reason why I think she is not as good as some of these other characters, she doesn't have any survivability by herself. So you need to build a team around her to allow her to do damage and be relevant within this fight. Stun her once, she is dead. The next one is quite a gimmick. Linkus has hit me with this several other times, and it does a ridiculous amount of damage to bruiser fights. However, if you put one single backline damage dealer that can hit either mid or backliners, Gremory will absolutely vaporize. The reason why this is the case is she has no means to protect herself. However, the one thing that I do find is that whenever you start out her fight, you will start out with her being sleepy. And this provides you with one neat thing, is that you cannot get CC'd. This way you can wait out your Leo S3s, start up with one of your skills, and still be away. So fights where you should use this if the enemy team only has bruises up in the front line, no real means to catch you up on the back line. If you have yourself, let's say, a Valance and a Dosarta and you still want to use your Gremory, then you can possibly do it like that. Naila is a jumping character that used to be very good and very likely used by a lot of top tier challengers, but fell off the bandwagon probably because of Dosarta and the fact that there are so many counters against her. She is a high mana character, which automatically makes her very susceptible to getting Lakrak. She doesn't have any CC immunity, so can get whacked out by a Lucias, can still get pulled in by a Demia, and in turn takes up too long to start off her full combo. Sad to say, but the next one upon the tier list is Chase, and yes, I do agree with this. Sadly, he is way worse than Kasel. He has basically all of Kasel's kit except for no jump. He kills himself on the S2 if there's enough heal rate reduction. He needs a lot of mana to really start out. You can build him on several other ways, but his damage always feels a little lackluster to me in comparison to Kasel. So yeah, we got ourselves Chase, so the only upside that I would have on him, greatest of statics in the game. But outside of that, you have yourself multiple ways to build him depending on what kind of artifact you want to use. The next one upon the list would be Lakrak, and I might not even agree with this, because I think that if you build him correctly, he can still be an absolute monstrosity. Does he have the damage to really do whatever needs to be done? No, but he can blow out a lot of people's mana, lock them down in the process, bust out rebel clauses, which I will show into any of these next upcoming videos of mine. But overall, I still think he has usability within my draft, and still, I just work this dude to the bone, and he definitely pulls his weight. On top of that, he's a mechanical class, which means that if you build him on an Ocelon set, you can get 100% crit rate, which in turn is really good against people who run Dosarta, Scarlet, who have a lot of innate crit resistance. Next one upon the list is Rephy, and Rephy is one of those characters that really fell off the bandwagon in contrast to all of these other healers. He has a ridiculous heal, doesn't get picked that much, has a low mana S2 dispel, which can basically cancel out anything that DLK does. But overall, the moment the dude gets pulled, he's very squishy, and all of his other skills don't really do as much, which means that he, in comparison, wouldn't be any higher onto the S tier than that. Next up on the list is Hilda, and Hilda is one of those characters where I don't really know where she stands, and I don't think she knows either. She can do damage, yes. She can heal rate reduce enemies, which in turn allows you to vaporize frontliners, but she doesn't have any means to reach people's backlines by herself. So if you are facing an enemy tank such as a Loman, you have barely any possibilities to go through the enemy lines to then hit the backline, which makes her a little bit wonky in terms of usability and cannot kill any other team. Then we got Demia, and Demia suffers from the same thing, and that is the Loman disease. Basically, if you got yourself a very tanky front line, you will have yourself a problem. However, if you ban that, then Demia can still shine, because he can literally cook up frontliners like nobody else, which is one of the reasons why he is in this position where he is. And then we're coming up at the A ranks, and starting off with Panzerone. Panzerone is one of those characters that can blow out the candles of an enemy team within a single skill. However, she's another character that is very reliant on a Christmas star ornament to really start out super fast, and if you face yourself a helm, a Shakmeh helm, then your damage will significantly diminish, and after you have done your skill, she will then not return any more damage for that, because her targeting outside of her S3 isn't all that good, and it's RNG as well. If you plan on building her, no problem, make sure to get yourself an Eva and get yourself a Valance into your team, or even use the gimmicks a Leo Baldwin to make sure that you burst down people in one go. Next up on the list is somewhat of a gimmick, and I heard some people on Challenger tried this out, but Annette after her buff received some nasty stuff. Her healing is quite impeccable, her amp on damage is ridiculous. However, I don't see her being played that often, so I don't quite know whether she can be ranked any higher than this. Zara is one of these characters that I believe still has a place in this game. However, once again, another character that would need a Christmas star ornament, which is a ridiculous investment to most people. But the reason why she is good is because her S1 holds a shield break and her S3 a continuous cleanse, which basically means that you can set yourself aside and beat down Yurias, Shamillas, Lucikiels, Evans, and all that. Lilia is another character that is quite comparable to Panzeron, has a ridiculous burst, but once again, if you run into a helm, your damage will significantly diminish and you can still get stunned at every angle, which means that this lady doesn't really hold a spot unless you draft her at like a 5th pick. Next is a double-edged sword in my opinion, because his damage is mainly coming from his blade stack. This spell to do it once, he does no more damage. And it takes him a little bit to get into his soul weapon. If he does do a lot of damage, but as well as Lilia, as well as Panzeron, if you cannot keep the dude safe, he is squishy, he will die right away. Sonya fell off the bandwagon massively with the changes to PvP with the TM gear. Reason why there's so many characters who have debuff accuracy, which in turn makes this lady absolutely ridiculously bad. There's so many shields that you gotta break and she doesn't have the potential to reach the backline this way, which means that she, in my opinion, doesn't even deserve an A rank place. Now Jane is one of these characters that I am not quite sure whether she should be on to the A rank. I haven't played her myself in the League of Honor. However, I do feel that she can be quite obnoxious. For one, her defense shred is ridiculous. Her attack reduction, ridiculous. The fact that she has an S4 that can let her stay relevant throughout the fight even if she dies. A T5 dark that can give her recovery rate as well, which in turn allow her to basically stay safe at every angle, makes it so that if you have like rushdown characters that really cannot do anything but kill your front line, then Jane might be a lady to go with. However, if you got a Chase with a pushback, a Gao, some other people with knockbacks, she can still get murdered and people will get into your backline. After that happens, guess what? All of your team is gonna die. Hannes is one of these characters that I'm usually afraid for in terms of the picking and banning phase. If this lady opens up your S1, she will not only deal a ridiculous amount of damage, but it also removes positive effects from the enemy, which in turn means Baldwin shields get negated and damage is imminent. Now after that is said and done, a spray from the S3 will likely kill a lot of other people as well. But for one reason and one reason only, she feels too much like a one-trick pony. Celica is a good but a very situational pick. For one, she is really good when you're fighting physical damage characters. Reason why is her T5 Dark, which gives physical defense to your highest attacker. So if you got yourself somebody on your backline or even a jumping character, then giving that physical defense to that single person, it will allow them to live and maybe even survive Kasels or any other physical damage dealer for that matter. The other reason why she is mad interesting is the fact that you can blind enemies. And this is a stat that doesn't really feel like anything, but if your opponents miss, you don't have to heal as much, you will be able to survive for longer. However, as with Jane, she's very prone to have rushdown characters that do have the ability to push you or just bypass you by just having AoE backline damage. Miriam is generally one of these characters that can snuff out most of these magical defense lowering characters. The problem that I think I have with her is that after you do an S1 and S3, you then will have to kill a person. If you don't, then you have a massive problem. Especially nowadays when people don't run a single target damage dealer into most of their lineups, this in itself doesn't seem as good because yes, she can snuff out a single problem, but with the cooldown being 14 seconds within a fight, it's way too long to then reapply the same skill once again. Epis is one of these characters that can jump people's backline and one-shot just about anything. She can even one-shot most of these frontliners if you let her. However, she's very prone to stun at the earlier start of a fight, which means you can lock her down and just scoop her at any angle. Kaula, aka Blue Shrek, is wow. I've seen actually top tier, top 10 challengers use Kaula. I'm not even sure why he is this high up, but he is interesting to some degree because he gains CC immunity onto an S2, which makes sure that he will heal and reduces all damage taken. So swift win with attack speed and critical chance for 15 seconds. However, is dispellable, so in that case I don't feel it being that good. The Thunderbolt itself will strike random enemies, which makes it RNG to most cases, meaning that everything that he puts down onto the field sounds good but can be countered, which is probably one of the reasons why he doesn't go any higher than A rank. Kybera is one of these characters that I recently encountered with Rodina, and he absolutely murdered me with this character because he used a singular gimmick, and that was this UT into ignore defenses 3, and he made sure to let this dude stay alive into my backline using an Evan to, well, the best of degrees. It was really fun to see this. But if you're ever wondering why this character isn't doing any damage, then yes, you're not using the right build, and 2, his normal attacks are absolutely bad. Maybe along the lines, if the meta changes completely once again, this dude will be relevant, but I feel overall that most of these assassins just are bad by default. They do not take the cake over Seria, which basically does everything an assassin should do, and that's one-shot people and jump to the backline. Krisha is one of these characters that can be very potent, however you need a team around her. Her S3 deletes everything on the field that is positive effects on the enemy side. Her S2 dispels negative effects from self and does damage, removes stacks lightning, and silences enemies for 2 seconds, which is crazy. And I'm not sure which one of these 3 skills actually one-shots people, but I've seen her actually one-shot my front line for no apparent reason. However, she's once it gets squishy, you can stun her, and she doesn't then provide any other support to your own team. Visca is one of these characters where I feel she could be good if she gets a buff. She is a Gao, but she isn't, because it takes you an S2 and an S3 to stun people and clog people. But by the time that happens, you cannot pull people in just yet. She's not as beefy as Gao is because of the differences in trans perks and unique weapons. She can just have a similar purpose to Gao with displacement and facing opponents the other way. But outside of that, I don't think it's that good at all. And then we got Bao. I do believe that Bao holds a special place in my heart because of the displacement. However, I still find it way too risky to make him A220 to see what he is doing. The reason why I think he's interesting is because of the attack speed reduction. It's a percentual attack speed reduction, which means that the higher attack speed that the enemy has, the bigger it becomes. As well as it being on a hellishly low cooldown. And on top of that, obviously you have a displacement, which makes it very fun for a rushdown team with Chase or Nicky in that case to be very relevant. And if you build him on, well, the budget of budget, then he has his place within fights, but his shield can get dispelled. However, this is an 8-second shield. It will allow you to survive just about anything if the enemy team doesn't have any dispels. Gladi is one of these sad factors where I hope that this dude will receive a buff. He has one of the greatest gimmicks in the game, which turns his attack into defense, which makes this dude interesting if you think about survivability. However, there are way too many characters who can both stun him, ignore defense, which in turn blow this character absolutely into bits. And the other problem is his unique weapons and his unique treasures can get dispelled, so he will never be able to ramp up his damage like you wanted to. There are, however, some people who run him absolute full damage with a Spirit Morph Ring, which could make him viable, but once again, if his unique weapons, unique treasures get dispelled, this dude barely does anything. Cassandra is one of these nasty gimmicks which allow burst teams to really thrive. However, she feels a little bit lackluster in comparison to all these other healers that do relatively the same. She doesn't heal as much as your Shea does. She doesn't amp any mana to your team. The only thing that she does is deal crit rates. And with continuous cleanses like Isaiah or Valance's too, this character literally fell off the bandwagon. Next up is the Grandpappy Ricardo, and he is interesting for one reason and one reason only nowadays, and that is have a lot of magical defense given to the rest of your allies. And if you pop your S2, you will save them for days to come. His S3 sadly doesn't break any shields. I hope he will get buffed in that manner. To allow to do this will make him an absolute S tier character. But for now, he is very situational, only good in magical. Only good against magical teams, but there are some people who pull this dude out of the woodworks. I haven't seen it happen to myself yet, but I feel that might change within 1 or 2 months. Maria is one of these characters where I believe that her kit actually serves a lot of great purposes. Pulls in people, pushes people, locks people down, and sadly, it doesn't provide as much. However, on the challenger ranks, I've actually seen her do some things here and there. So would I say that she's absolutely useless? Not necessarily, but I don't know what would make her viable or what team would be good with her. Zephyr is another gimmick which people used previously, and if you can save this dude by any chance, he can do a ridiculous amount of damage and stun people on top of that. But like I said, since there are so many ways to CC immune your character, the gimmick itself fell off the bandwagon. The only thing that is then left is basically his damage, and you could rather take all sorts of other damage dealers such as a Nyx that is continuous, that doesn't take any mana, just auto attacks. And that is the reason why Nyx is higher than Zephyr, and I don't think Zephyr will be any good unless they really make his S3 a pulling skill. Next up is the Laser Beam Baby, aka Aisha, and she is good as long as you keep her safe. However, if you pull out her S2 and you get stunned, you will then have a ridiculous cooldown, which once again within a fight will probably never happen, and her damage will then fall off straight away. This is one of these reasons why Aisha never really took off. However, you can build around her obviously so she can do her S2 skill. If you get a full laser beam off, the entire team will die, but if you would put this against a Rodina, which does a quite similar fashion, Rodina is way better because she is CC immune onto her S3 and she kills everything super fast. Taili is a massive gimmick and she is interesting for one reason and one reason only, and that is a Soul Spring Water opener S1. I use this in a tournament and actually beat people up with it. However, her whole gimmick was about having penetration, dealing damage toward high HP characters. That in itself really is lackluster. I haven't seen anybody play this as of late because there's so much AoE damage coming around, so many characters that can jump, and she doesn't provide any real tankiness to the rest of your team. Normal Ffrey, in contrast to Fall of Ffrey, doesn't have any real offensive abilities but has a ridiculous shield and heal at her disposal. UT1 is the one thing that people end up using because it has blindness, but outside of not having any offensive capacities, no cleanses for real, she really doesn't fill a spot within the League of Honor currently. Coming up with the B tier rank, starting with Urzi. She's interesting if you want to try and one-shot people, but in League of Honor it proves to be a very difficult task. Would she be interesting once you get her started up? Yes, but to do that she needs a lot of mana, and after that you can still cleanse off and dispel all of her stuff. So I wouldn't see her take off unless you really build around her. Flush is another character that suffers from the same assassin disease, and that is the fact that Scarlets are there, Lakraks are there, and absolutely blow these characters out of the water. You need to have yourself a little bit of mana to do your very first jump. If you do, however, jump, you do get to kill off like backliners or mages for that matter, which he was meant to do. However, there are way better options to do this. Cecilia is one of these gimmicks that I've used in my stream previously, but she is another character that would be very interesting with a Christmas star ornament. I've tried her on several other builds into previous seasons, but to get her to work, it's barely possible. She's way too squishy, doesn't do enough backline damage to really kill anything, in contrast to, let's say, a Seria or an Epis even. So there are way better picks for that single role. For those of you who are very prone to trying out Yana with her legendary skin on League of Honor, I would not advise you to do so. Her damage is absolutely horrendous, and well, yeah, just don't do this. And you might be saying Celine is on the same boat. However, there is one person, Challenger League of Honor, consistently top 100, and that is Pamacat, and he has been blasting me with his Celine lineup, which is one of the reasons why I tend to say this to people. You can make characters work, but you gotta play it smart. You gotta build a team around it to make them work. Naroxis is on a similar fashion. The dude absolutely makes your whole entire team tanky. However, it's only on the physical defense side, which means that if there are any characters who can either jump you or have a ignore defense, Naroxis becomes obsolete. The other part that I really like about this dude is he has attack speed reduction of the enemies. And this is also a percentual base, such as Bao is. Combine these two characters and you will see the nastiest slow-mo of a lifetime. However, in contrast to all of these top tier tanks, I would not pick this at all. For those of you who are familiar with Casual Gamer, you are familiar with Audi PvP. Get a super fast opener S3 and you will have your whole entire team with enough mana and cooldowns to blow your enemy apart. However, this thing can still easily be countered if you don't have the proper investments. There are way better options that you can do. But once again, such as the Celine pick, if you can make and build a team around it, you can still make this work. However, what really sets this off is that there are way too many high HP characters, so many characters who currently have a Shakmeh helm which diminishes damage, and if this one trick pony actually doesn't prevail, then you are left with an absolute problem because you can then not kill people. Isola is down there because she absolutely does nothing. Her attack speed is locked, her skills are locked behind any type of cooldown. Her S1 is cleansable, which needs to be comboed into the S2 and S3 to do an amazing amount of damage. So when people have some gaming knowledge, Isola absolutely does nothing. Arch used to be OP, but not anymore, and this has been the case for about 2 years. He received a minor buff at some point, but still didn't make him relevant. There are barely any people who try and build him, so I don't necessarily know what the status on him is because you barely see the dude. For those of you who watched my stream and actually saw this one, I saw an Estelle enemy, and her healing, just as Annette is quite ridiculous. However, her S1 CC immunity is interesting, but for what I know, it can still get dispelled, so she might be a viable character, but only if your enemy doesn't have any dispel. Philip, aka D-Lip, which is quite similarly built to a Sonya, suffers from the same disease, and that is called continuous stuns, which makes this character absolutely useless. With Ophelia, I generally don't know why she is this low because I still got whooped by her several other times, maybe for one that I don't see her all that much. But she is interesting for a reason that her S3 removes positive effects from enemies, which deals a lot of damage against Lomans, and her S1 has innate ridiculous amount of damage because of the defense ignore. There is a person, Linkus, who absolutely whooped my ass in League of Victory with this single character. Rephy is an absolute gimmick that shouldn't even be in this game. For those of you who are building her, quite interesting, but I would like to see her work at some point because she has a very interesting gimmick together with her brother. But very lackluster, needs a lot of mana to do whatever a Seria or an Epis or a Naya could do. Reheat has one interesting gimmick, and that would be the S1 mana block, which could make him relevant onto a burst team, and the fact that nobody really picks him at all. But yeah, we're grasping at straws here, ladies and gentlemen. Now, let's go over the C tier hero super fast. Roy, bad. Only jumps, very squishy, dies super fast. Claws is a worse Celica, basically grants no utility to the rest of your team. Rahartna with an opener, stun and cleanse and some mana drain might seem interesting. I've tried this out, don't do it, it's bad. Kara opener S1s have the ability to disrupt the enemy, but in no way, shape or form is she a AoE type of damage character, so you are better off taking a Miruru if you want to have her do exactly the same thing. Although I got whooped by Theos ever so often, this dude really has bad mechanics. His unique weapon doesn't play in his favor. His S2 can get dispelled. His S3 can actually one-shot people because I've had this happen several times on my stream. Wasn't funny. Would I recommend this dude? Hell no. Cleo has a ridiculous damage potential, but for that she needs a lot of mana, which in turn makes her very useless, and she doesn't provide anything else for the team. Talisha, I've seen her once or twice, but after that, never again. She doesn't provide any damage or healing that is consistent, so not a pick for that matter. Priscilla is usually a buffer. I've seen people use her into a similar pulling capacity with Demia, however it doesn't pull in backline, so it isn't as potent as anything else. Doesn't do any damage neither. For an assassin, Reina has one of the worst targetings and therefore is absolutely horrible. She cannot even kill a tank with her current skill, still needs mana, can get stunned, so no use at all. Remember, there were some people who ran Artemia on League of Honor. They made it work, however they quite stepped off her and her whole kit because her S4 is as random as it can be, and she needs a lot of mana to really get herself going. For those people who try Crow, good job on putting Valance there, good job in actually one-shotting some people for some crazy footage, but after that he's a one-trick pony. You can't just simply save yourself if you do it correctly. Kersey is an absolute unit once you proc her unique weapon several times in a row, however the low percentage makes this absolutely horrendous. If you want to see some crazy numbers, put a dice of magical letters. There's another 3% chance with a ridiculous amount of magical damage. You need to play about 1,000 games for this to proc and one shot the entire enemy lineup, but if it happens, I guess it might be fun. Mora is just horrible. She doesn't provide anything for your team, not in terms of survivability, not in terms of damage. She only does heal rate reduction, but that ramps up super slow, so it's absolutely good. There's some people who decided to say we can do DPS Lavril. For those of you who did that, congratulations, you earned yourself a place in the Hall of Fame. Outside of that, absolutely useless character. Same is said for DPS Marianas, even though you want to stick that big syringe up people's culos. I do get it, please don't. Now, with not even mentioning the F tier ranks, I'm going to close this video off. Hopefully this was helpful in any case. I know this was massively long, so for those of you who have been sticking toward the end, thank you so much for watching. Put it down below what I need to emphasize even more next time, and I'll see you guys then. Peace!